The Navy SEAL walked into the clinic to sign paperwork and walk back out unseen, like he had done for years. Then an old woman stopped him. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask his name. She only said one sentence. "My dog has the same mark you do." The SEAL froze. Because that mark was not a tattoo. It was not a badge. It was a scar placed during a mission that officially never existed. A mission where he was left behind. A mission where a handler broke orders, and a dog refused to leave. The system had buried the truth. Time had tried to erase it, but God had kept it alive. Because some debts are not meant to be repaid with power. They are repaid with presence and with peace. Winter pressed quietly against Marquette, Michigan, the kind of winter that didn't howl or threaten, but endured. Snow clung to the edges of the streets near the harbor, packed down by boots and tires, stained gray by time and salt. Lake Superior lay somewhere beyond the buildings, unseen but felt, its cold presence carried inland by a steady wind that slipped through coats and seams alike. Grant Holloway moved through it without pause, his stride measured, unhurried, as if the cold were simply another condition to acknowledge and pass through. He was 43, tall and solid without bulk, his frame shaped by years of discipline rather than display. His hair was cut short, dark threaded with gray at the temples, and his face bore the stillness of a man who had learned long ago that expression was a liability. He wore a plain charcoal jacket with no markings, dark jeans, and worn boots, clothing chosen for function rather than identity. There was nothing about him that asked to be noticed, yet people often stepped aside when he passed, sensing something they could not name. The clinic sat just off the main road, a modest brick building weathered by decades of lake wind. A faded sign above the door read, "North Shore Veterinary and Veteran Support." Grant had been here before, always briefly, always without announcement. He came to help in small, invisible ways, signing off on logistics paperwork, reviewing transition forms for veterans who preferred places like this to larger institutions. Today was no different. He was here to sign documents, nothing more. A task, an errand, something to complete and leave behind. Inside, the air was warm and faintly antiseptic, layered with the dull bitterness of old coffee. The waiting area was quiet, nearly empty. A young couple sat near the far wall, whispering to each other, a restless tabby cat enclosed in a carrier at their feet. The cat was young, all sleek fur and bright eyes, offended by confinement and making its displeasure known with sharp flicks of its tail. Grant noticed the movement without interest and turned his attention to the counter, nodding once to the receptionist before moving on. Near the entrance sat an elderly woman, alone. She was small but upright, her posture deliberate, hands folded neatly over a worn leather purse resting on her lap. Her white hair was pulled back into a low bun, her face lined deeply in a way that suggested endurance more than age. She wore a thick hand-knit sweater and sensible shoes, clean despite the slush outside. Her light blue eyes were clear and steady, watching the room without impatience. At her feet lay a German shepherd. The dog was old, his black and tan coat dulled by time, gray heavy around his muzzle and eyes. He lay with his forelegs extended, head upright, ears angled forward in quiet awareness. He did not look at the people in the room. His attention remained fixed on the hallway beyond the waiting area, as if holding a position that no one had assigned, but that he intended to keep. There was nothing relaxed about him, yet nothing tense. He simply was. Grant registered the woman and the dog automatically, elderly civilian, retired working animal, and continued walking. He had already passed them when the woman's voice reached him, calm and unraised. "Sir." Grant stopped. The pause was not dramatic. It was instinctive, the kind of halt that came from years of responding to sounds that mattered. He turned slowly to face her. The woman had not moved. Her hands remained folded. The dog had not shifted, His gaze still held the hallway behind Grant, ears forward, body composed. The woman met Grant's eyes steadily, without challenge or hesitation. "My dog has a mark," she said, "a mark just like yours." The words settled into the room without echo, without urgency. Grant felt something tighten in his chest, a sensation he had not felt in years. His eyes dropped, not to the woman's face, but to the dog. He stepped closer, just enough to change the angle of his view, and saw it on the inside of the dog's left hind leg. A faint scar, curved and imperfect, intersected by a short line. Old, deliberate, unmistakable. Grant's hand rose without conscious thought, pressing lightly against his chest beneath his jacket, fingers finding the familiar place under his collarbone. The dog shifted his weight subtly, a minimal adjustment, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Grant looked back at the woman. She did not smile. She did not explain. She simply waited, her expression composed, patient, as though she understood that whatever memory had just been stirred did not belong to her to name. For a moment, the clinic faded. The low hum of heat, the faint rustle of papers at the counter, the distant sound of a door opening and closing somewhere deeper in the building, all of it receded. In its place rose a memory Grant had buried more than 10 years earlier, sealed away, not because it was painful, but because it was not supposed to exist at all. He had come to sign papers and walk past. Instead, he stood rooted in place, staring at a mark that should not have been there, knowing with quiet certainty that something he had left behind had just found him again. Grant Holloway did not move right away. He stood where the woman had stopped him, the warmth of the clinic pressing against his back, the quiet, ordinary sounds continuing as if nothing had changed. Chairs shifted. A paper cup scraped lightly against a desk. Somewhere a printer finished a job and went silent. The world kept its rhythm. Grant's did not. His attention had narrowed to a single detail that should not have existed, a detail that had slipped past time and silence and appeared at his feet. The German shepherd lay still, close enough now that Grant could see the fine changes age had written into him. The dog was old, but not broken. His coat had dulled into softer shades of black and brown, gray thick around the muzzle, and spreading unevenly across his face. The fur along his hind legs was thinner, worn smooth by years of movement and rest on hard ground. His frame remained lean and ordered, muscle present beneath skin that no longer carried the elasticity of youth. His eyes were dark and steady, alert without restlessness. This was not a dog waiting for affection. This was a dog that had learned patience the hard way. Grant shifted his weight slightly, just enough for the overhead light to strike a different angle. The woman did not interrupt. The dog did not react. On the inside of the dog's left hind leg, just above the muscle where fur gave way to skin, the mark became visible. It was faint. Older than the dog looked at first glance. The skin there was puckered, healed unevenly, carrying the subtle texture of scar tissue rather than injury. A curved line arched shallowly, intersected by a short vertical stroke. No numbers, no letters, no symbol anyone could name. It was not a brand meant for identification. It was not a mark meant for display. It existed only for those who knew what it was. Grant knew. His breathing slowed, not by effort, but by memory. His left hand rose without instruction, fingers pressing lightly against his chest beneath the jacket, stopping where fabric met skin under his left collarbone. He did not expose the scar. He did not need to. He could feel it as clearly as if it had been cut moments ago. The same curve, the same short line, the same deliberate imperfection that had once been chosen for a reason no one had written down. The dog adjusted his leg by a fraction, a small controlled movement, joints stiff but obedient. The mark did not disappear. Grant's eyes remained fixed on it, his mind refusing, then failing, to explain it away. Coincidence had always been the refuge of people who did not know better. Grant had learned early that coincidence rarely survived close inspection. That scar on his own body had not been placed lightly. It had not been earned in celebration or grief. It had been created in silence, under harsh light, in a place where walls absorbed secrets and gave nothing back. There had been no forms to sign, no witnesses to confirm it afterward. The purpose had been simple and absolute: to remember, to bind, to acknowledge something that could not be spoken aloud. Grant had believed for years that the mark belonged only to him now, that whatever moment had required it had ended, sealed away beneath layers of classification and distance. Time had helped, not by erasing it, but by dulling its edges, turning it into something that lived beneath the skin rather than in the mind. Until now. He straightened slightly, the pressure of his fingers against his chest easing. His gaze lifted from the dog's leg to the middle distance, as if his eyes needed space to adjust to what they had just confirmed. The clinic remained unchanged. The woman still stood nearby, watching without intrusion. No one else in the room seemed aware that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. Grant looked back down at the dog. Rook remained motionless, his breathing slow and even. His ears were angled forward, not toward Grant, but toward the hallway behind him, maintaining a quiet vigilance that felt automatic rather than intentional. Grant recognized the posture instantly. He had worn its human equivalent more times than he could count. It was not tension, it was readiness held in reserve. The scar on the dog's leg was not identical to Grant's because it had been copied. It matched because it had been made with the same purpose, under the same understanding. The curve dipped slightly lower on one side than symmetry would have allowed. The intersecting line was shorter than instinct would have dictated. Those details were too specific to be accidental, too familiar to dismiss. Grant exhaled slowly, feeling the air leave his lungs with a weight he had not expected. The memory attached itself not as an image, but as sensation. Cold concrete beneath his back, the sharp smell of disinfectant, the certainty that whatever came next would not be written down. He had accepted that then, without question. He had carried it ever since. He did not speak. There was nothing to say yet. The dog shifted his gaze briefly, just enough for one dark eye to settle on Grant before returning to the hallway. It was not curiosity. It was acknowledgement, the kind that did not linger. Grant's jaw tightened. The mark had survived, not just on his body, but beyond it. It had been carried forward, preserved in flesh and silence, attached to an animal that still held ground long after the reason for doing so had faded from official memory. He had believed the scar existed because of a mission that had never been written down, that it remained only because forgetting it would have been easier than explaining it. Seeing it again now, mirrored on the body of an old dog in a quiet clinic, Grant understood something he had not allowed himself to consider. What had been buried had not disappeared. It had waited. Grant Holloway remained where he was, the image of the mark on Rook's leg still fixed behind his eyes, when the elderly woman finally shifted. It was a small movement, almost apologetic, as if she had waited long enough and understood that silence had done what it could. She adjusted the purse on her lap, smoothing the leather with fingers that were steady despite their age, then looked up at Grant with a levelness that suggested she had rehearsed this moment many times without knowing when it would arrive. "My husband's name was Elias Klein," she said. The name entered the air quietly and stayed there, unadorned, without emphasis. Grant did not react outwardly. He did not nod or repeat it. Inside, the sound of it struck something that had never been labeled properly, a place in his memory occupied by actions without faces and voices without names. Margaret Klein did not rush to fill the space. She sat as she had before, back straight, shoulders relaxed, her posture shaped by years of standing beside a man who had lived his life in careful alignment. She was slender, not fragile, her frame compact and disciplined, the kind that suggested she had learned early how to make herself useful without being noticed. Her face, lined deeply around the eyes and mouth, carried the calm of someone who had made peace with unfinished conversations. When she spoke again, her voice was neither soft nor sharp. It was simply clear. "He was a handler," she continued. "Not the kind people write books about, not the kind that gets interviewed. He worked with dogs. That was it, or that's all he ever said." Grant lowered himself into the chair opposite her without asking, his movements deliberate, controlled. He did not break eye contact. "How long ago did he pass?" 2 years, Margaret replied. "Stroke, at home, quick." She paused, then added, "He would have preferred it that way." Grant believed her. Rook remained at Margaret's feet, his body aligned with hers, but his attention still held the hallway. The dog's presence felt less like companionship and more like continuity, as if he were an extension of something that had once stood taller and spoken less. Grant found himself watching the way the dog held his head, the angle of his ears, the subtle tension in his shoulders. It was familiar in a way that unsettled him. "He never talked about the war," Margaret said. "Not really. He came home quiet, quieter than before. He slept lightly. He walked the dog before dawn every morning, no matter the weather. He didn't like crowds. He didn't like being thanked." A faint, dry smile touched her lips. "Said gratitude made people careless." Grant's mouth tightened. He had known men like that. He had been one of them. "Did he ever mention a mission that went wrong?" Grant asked. Margaret considered the question carefully. "He never said it went wrong," she replied. "He said it went the only way it could." She glanced down at Rook briefly, her hand resting near his collar without touching it. "He did say there was a man who didn't come back the way the paperwork said he did." Grant's gaze sharpened, but he remained silent. "He didn't give a name," Margaret continued. "Didn't need to. He said that man lived because the dog refused to leave him. That's how he put it. Not because of heroics, not because of luck, because the dog decided." Grant exhaled slowly. The words settled into him with a weight he had not anticipated. He had carried his version of that night alone, stripped of context and acknowledgement, reduced to survival without explanation. Hearing it reflected back through someone else's memory shifted something he had kept rigid for years. "There was no ceremony," Margaret went on, "no letters, no medals. When Elias came home, there was no record of what he'd done beyond what he was already cleared to say. Eventually, even that disappeared. He tried once, years later, to get something corrected in his file. Not recognition, just accuracy." She shook her head slightly. "They told him there was nothing to correct." Grant leaned back in the chair, the weight of it creaking softly beneath him. He had expected this part, the absence, the silence. It was the most consistent element of operations that were never meant to be acknowledged. "He didn't fight it," Margaret said. "He didn't know how, or maybe he knew better than to try." Her eyes met Grant's again. "He didn't need the record. He just needed to know the man lived." Rook shifted then, easing himself into a different position, joints stiff but cooperative. He lay down slowly, forelegs extended, head resting between them. Even at rest, his ears remained angled forward, alert. Age had taken his speed, but it had not taken his awareness. Grant watched the movement closely. "He's older than he looks," he said. Margaret nodded. 13, maybe 14, we lost track of the exact year. She allowed herself a small, genuine smile this time. "He's stubborn, always has been, eats slowly, sleeps lightly, still watches the doors." Grant recognized the pattern without effort. "Doesn't bark much." "No," she agreed. "Almost never." The neighbors thought something was wrong at first. Grant's eyes returned to the mark on the dog's leg, now partially hidden by the change in posture. "That mark," he said. "Did your husband ever explain it?" Margaret shook her head. "He said it was medical. Necessary. That's all. She hesitated. He said if I ever saw another man with the same one, I should speak to him, that he would understand. Grant felt the words land deeper than he expected. He had not realized until that moment how isolated the mark had made him. How final. Seeing it mirrored on Rook had been shocking enough. Knowing that Elias Klein had anticipated this meeting, had prepared his wife for it in the only way he could, shifted the moment from coincidence to intention. Grant stood slowly, pacing a short distance before turning back. The clinic felt smaller now, as if the walls had edged closer. He ran a hand once through his hair, then let it fall to his side. "There's no record of him," Grant said. It was not a question. Margaret met his gaze evenly. "No," she said. "There never was. Not where it mattered." Grant nodded. That aligned with everything he knew. Handlers like Elias existed in the margins. Their work was precise, essential, and easy to erase. Dogs were reassigned, men rotated out, files were redacted until they meant nothing at all. He never regretted it, Margaret added quietly. Whatever it was, whatever it cost him. He never said so. Grant believed that too. The waiting room door opened then, admitting a gust of cold air and a woman in her late 20s carrying a clipboard. She was tall and narrow, with auburn hair pulled into a practical ponytail and a face marked by habitual focus. She wore scrubs beneath a heavy coat, her movements brisk but considerate. This was Dr. Lauren Whitaker, though Grant did not yet know her name. She paused when she saw the arrangement of people near the entrance, her eyes moving quickly from Grant to Margaret to the dog. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice professional, calm. Margaret answered before Grant could. "Yes," she said. "We're fine." Lauren nodded, accepting the response with a faint smile. Her gaze lingered briefly on Rook, assessing, then moved on. "Let me know if you need anything," she said, already stepping away. Grant watched her go, then turned back to Margaret. "Elias saved my life," he said simply. Margaret did not react with surprise. She did not ask for details. She only inclined her head slightly, as if confirming something she had always known, but never needed spoken aloud. "I thought so," she said. Rook lifted his head at the sound of Grant's voice, eyes meeting his for the first time. The look was brief, direct, and unreadable. Then the dog lowered his head again, settling back into stillness. Grant felt something ease in his chest, not relief, but recognition. Elias Klein had no record, no citation, no official acknowledgement, but his work had endured, carried forward in flesh and habit, in a dog that still watched hallways and a man who still bore a scar meant to remember silence. Outside, the winter light dimmed as clouds thickened over the lake. Inside the clinic, Grant understood with quiet certainty that the absence of a record did not mean the absence of truth. It only meant the truth had survived in other ways. The memory did not arrive gently. It came in sharp pieces, fast and insistent, like something that had been waiting for permission and finally took it. Grant Holloway stood near the window of the clinic, the cold light from Lake Superior washing the glass pale and flat, and suddenly he was no longer there. It was night, hot, dry, and breathless. The kind of heat that made metal burn the skin and turned every movement into effort. The compound had looked ordinary from above, just another low structure pressed into dust and stone. The briefing had been clean. Too clean. In and out. Minimal resistance. No deviation. Grant had heard that language before. He had learned not to trust it, but he had followed it anyway. They were inside when the world broke. The blast hit without warning. Not loud at first, just pressure, a violent compression that crushed sound out of existence. The ceiling dropped in sections, concrete and metal slamming down unevenly. Grant was thrown sideways, his weapon ripped from his hands. The floor gave way beneath him, and then there was only darkness and weight. When he came to, He was pinned. Concrete crushed his lower body, trapping his leg at an angle that made pain immediate and absolute. Dust filled his mouth and lungs, turning every breath into a controlled act. His helmet was gone. His radio hissed once and went dead. Somewhere outside the structure, gunfire cracked, then faded. Voices shouted. Then those too disappeared. Grant tried to move. Pain flared white-hot through his ribs and thigh, sharp enough to blur his vision. He stopped. He knew better. Panic wasted oxygen. Movement wasted strength. He lay still and counted breaths, slow and deliberate, forcing his body to obey. Time stretched thin. He understood the moment it happened. The team had pulled back. Secondary collapse risk. Unrecoverable zone. He had issued those orders himself before. He did not curse them now. He simply accepted what they meant. He was alone. The air thickened as dust settled. Heat pressed down. Grant focused on staying conscious, on keeping his breathing shallow and controlled. He did not think about rescue. He thought about minutes. Then something moved. At first, he assumed it was debris shifting, the building continuing to collapse around him. He held still, bracing for pain or darkness. Instead, he heard something else. Soft, measured. The scrape of paws finding stable ground. Grant forced his eyes open. Through the haze, a shape moved toward him. Low, controlled. A dog. The animal emerged slowly, nose close to the ground, body angled in clean lines. His coat was streaked with soot, ears forward, tail low and still. He did not bark. He did not hesitate. He moved with purpose, not curiosity. Grant's mind rejected the image immediately. Military working dogs did not operate alone. They did not disobey extraction orders. They did not appear in places already written off. The dog stopped a few feet away and looked up. Even through the dust and pain, Grant saw it. Assessment, not concern, not excitement. The dog stepped closer, nosed briefly under Grant's arm, then shifted position, bracing his body against Grant's side. A shadow followed. The man moved fast despite his injury, favoring one arm, rifle hanging loose but ready. He was broad-shouldered, his movements efficient, economical. Blood darkened his sleeve. His face was set, calm in a way that came from decision, not confidence. "You alive?" the man asked. Grant nodded once. "My name's Elias," the handler said. "We're moving." Grant tried to speak. His throat burned. "Team's gone." "I know," Elias replied. No judgment, no hesitation. Elias crouched, working quickly with one good hand, clearing debris, checking Grant's leg. He did not explain. He did not ask. He moved like someone who had already committed to the outcome. "Dog first," Elias said. "On my count." The dog adjusted instantly, sliding under Grant's arm, muscles locking into place. Elias braced on the other side. His jaw tightened. His breathing stayed controlled. They lifted. Pain tore through Grant, bright and immediate. He bit down hard, blood filling his mouth, and forced himself not to scream. The dog held steady, shifting micro-movements to keep balance. Elias dragged and lifted in short bursts, timing each pull to Grant's breath. They moved fast, not clean, not smooth, but constant. The structure groaned above them. Dust fell in sheets. The dog surged ahead in short runs, clearing paths, circling back, guiding without command. Elias followed, dragging Grant through rubble and heat, ignoring the blood soaking his sleeve, ignoring the tremor in his injured arm. At the edge of the compound, Elias changed direction without warning, away from the planned extraction route, toward a narrow canyon choked with rock and shadow. It should have been a kill zone. Elias took it anyway. They moved downhill, then sideways, then up again, every step burning. Grant's vision narrowed, his strength faded. He focused on one thing only. Do not lose consciousness here. Rotor wash hit them suddenly. Light cut through the darkness overhead. Grant barely registered it. Medics rushed forward, hands reaching for Elias first. "No," Elias said, stepping back. "Him." Grant felt himself lifted, felt the dog press close one last time before being pulled away. Then the world tilted and went black. He woke stateside. The report was short. Injury sustained during hostile engagement. Delayed extraction due to environmental factors. No mention of a handler, no mention of a dog. The mission was classified beyond review. Footage unavailable. Questions redirected. Grant had asked once. He had been told there was nothing to correct. Standing in the clinic now, the memory snapped back into place with brutal clarity. The night had not been erased. It had been buried, broken into fragments, and scattered across systems designed to forget inconvenient decisions. Elias Klein had gone back when everyone else had left. Rook had followed without question. Together, they had pulled Grant out of a place that did not allow recovery, and then they had vanished into paperwork thin enough to tear and thick enough to hide behind. The mission could not exist because admitting it meant admitting disobedience that saved a life. Grant opened his eyes. The winter light outside had dimmed, clouds thick over the lake. Inside the clinic, Rook lay quietly at Margaret's feet, older now, slower, but unchanged where it counted. The mission had never existed. Grant was standing there because it had. The clinic settled back into its ordinary cadence after the memory loosened its grip on Grant Holloway. The waiting room returned to small sounds and patient movements, the kind that filled space without meaning anything. Grant remained where he was for a moment longer, eyes open now, posture steady, the weight of the past still present but contained. Rook lay at Margaret Klein's feet, older joints easing into stillness, his breathing slow and measured, watchfulness never fully released. Margaret sat as she always had, hands folded, gaze forward, composed in the way of someone who had learned to let truth arrive on its own schedule. It was then that Dr. Lauren Whitaker re-entered the room. Lauren was in her early 30s, tall and slender without fragility, her movements efficient and unhurried. Auburn hair was pulled back into a practical ponytail that stayed out of her face, and faint lines of concentration had already settled around her eyes. She wore clean scrubs beneath a light jacket, the pockets weighted with pens and folded notes. There was a quiet precision to her presence, the kind shaped by years of learning to make decisions alone and live with them. Lauren had grown up around military bases, her father an engineer who had vanished overseas during a logistics assignment that never quite added up. The absence had left her with a respect for systems and a suspicion of them at the same time, a balance she carried into her work. She stopped when she reached Margaret and Rook, her gaze dropping instinctively to the dog. Lauren's expression shifted slightly, not alarmed, but attentive. She knelt to Rook's level without touching him, careful not to assume permission. Up close, she took in the signs she had missed earlier, the stiffness in his hindquarters, the way his eyes tracked the hallway before returning to her, the calm that came from habit rather than comfort. "Mrs. Klein," Lauren said gently, "do you have a moment?" Margaret looked up, meeting her eyes. "Of course." Lauren hesitated, then glanced briefly at Grant, assessing him with the practiced neutrality of a clinician. She did not ask him to leave. She sensed correctly that this conversation would not benefit from secrecy. "I was reviewing Rook's intake," Lauren said, keeping her voice low. "There's something in his file that doesn't sit right." Margaret's hands tightened once around her purse, then relaxed. "What is it?" Lauren rose and gestured toward the counter. "If you don't mind, I'll explain." They moved a few steps away, Grant following at a respectful distance, his presence quiet but unmistakable. Lauren pulled a tablet from her jacket pocket, the screen glowing softly as she navigated through layered menus. The interface was familiar, bureaucratic, designed to look neutral while deciding fates in the background. "Rook's registered as retired," Lauren said, but not fully cleared. She turned the screen slightly so Margaret could see. A line of text sat near the bottom, understated and clinical. Legacy asset review required. Grant felt the words settle with a dull finality. Lauren continued, her tone measured. Legacy asset is what the system uses for animals with prior deployment markers that don't resolve cleanly. Age, incomplete handler documentation, missing transfer confirmations. Most of the time, it's just paperwork lag, but sometimes it triggers a review. What kind of review? Margaret asked. Lauren did not answer immediately. She knew how to pace truth. It means the file gets flagged. Once that happens, the next steps aren't decided here. Grant leaned forward slightly. Where are they decided? Lauren met his eyes. At a regional level, sometimes higher. Margaret absorbed this without visible reaction. What happens to the dog? Lauren's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That depends on what they find. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes they recommend transfer to a federal facility for reassessment. Grant understood the language beneath the language. Reassessment meant removal. It meant distance. It meant decisions made by people who would never see how Rook held a hallway or how he listened for danger long after danger had stopped calling his name. When did this flag appear? Grant asked. Lauren tapped the screen. This morning, automated sweep. It runs quarterly. Margaret exhaled slowly. So it wasn't because we came in. No, Lauren said quickly. This would have happened regardless. Your timing just brought it to the surface. Rook shifted at Margaret's feet, adjusting his position, ears flicking once as if responding to something none of them could hear. Lauren noticed and glanced down, then back up again. He's older, she said, but he's still intact. Grant nodded. He never stopped working. Lauren studied him for a moment longer than professionalism strictly required. There was something about the way he spoke that matched what she saw in the dog. Contained readiness. Purpose held in reserve. There's another issue, Lauren said. The handler record. Margaret's eyes sharpened. What record? Lauren scrolled. There isn't one that completes the chain. The system shows a discharge, then a gap. No formal transfer authorization. No closure. That's not an accident, Grant said quietly. Lauren did not argue. No, she agreed. It usually isn't. Margaret looked between them. What do they do when a file doesn't close? Lauren answered honestly. They try to close it. The silence that followed carried weight. It was not fear that settled over the small group, but inevitability. Systems did not like open ends. They pulled at them until something gave. I don't want him taken, Margaret said. The words were simple, unadorned, carrying no plea. He's earned his rest? Lauren believed her. She also believed the system would not care. There are steps, Lauren said. Appeals, documentation, context. But it takes time. How much? Grant asked. Lauren shook her head slightly. Once a review is triggered, the timeline isn't generous. Grant straightened. Then we shouldn't waste any of it. Lauren hesitated, then nodded. I'll flag this locally, she said. That buys us a little room. Margaret placed a hand on Rook's neck, fingers resting lightly against fur worn smooth by years of service. The dog leaned into the contact just enough to acknowledge it. What do you need from me? Margaret asked. Lauren looked at Grant again before answering. Names? Dates? Anything that fills the gaps? Grant felt the old weight return, heavier now because it had a direction. There aren't many, he said. That's the problem. Lauren's gaze softened slightly. Then we start with what we have. She closed the tablet and slipped it back into her pocket. I'll keep this quiet for as long as I can, but the flag is there. It won't disappear on its own. Grant nodded. He had never believed in problems resolving themselves. Outside, the winter light had thinned further, the sky pressing low against the harbor. Inside the clinic, a line of code had surfaced from beneath layers of neglect and classification, and with it, the past had been summoned back into relevance. Rook remained where he was, older now, slower, but alert. The system had noticed him. And once noticed, nothing stayed buried for long. Grant Holloway did not sit. He remained standing near the narrow table in the consultation room, weight evenly balanced, hands resting loosely at his sides. The room was small and undecorated, built for brief conversations and quick decisions, not for the kind of truth that lingered. The overhead light hummed faintly. Outside, the winter afternoon pressed gray and flat against the windows, Lake Superior hidden behind clouds heavy with snow. Dr. Lauren Whitaker stood opposite him, tablet in hand. Up close, her composure was more apparent. She was tall and slender, her posture straight without stiffness, auburn hair pulled back with practiced simplicity. Her face carried the marks of long focus rather than stress, eyes sharp and observant. She had learned to speak carefully to authority, not out of fear, but out of necessity. Systems had taken her father years ago without explanation. She trusted data more than reassurance. Margaret Klein sat near the wall, hands folded, her purse resting neatly against her knee. She did not interrupt. She had learned over decades that men like Grant did not need encouragement when they finally chose to speak. Rook lay at her feet, body angled toward the door, head resting low but alert. His breathing was slow. His presence filled the room quietly, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Lauren cleared her throat softly. "I've put a temporary local hold on the review," she said. "It won't last long. When the regional office sees the flag hasn't been resolved, they'll push." Grant nodded once. "That's enough." Lauren hesitated. "Enough for what?" "For the system to listen," Grant replied. He stepped closer to the table and rested his fingertips lightly on its surface, not leaning, not claiming space. "I'm not here to appeal," he said, "and I'm not here to ask for an exception." Lauren watched him closely now. Margaret did not move. Rook's ears flicked once, then settled again. "I'm here to correct a record," Grant continued. "Not the whole thing, just the part that matters." Lauren glanced down at her tablet, then back up. "What part is that?" Grant did not answer immediately. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a folded piece of paper, edges worn soft from years of being carried without purpose. He placed it on the table and unfolded it carefully. It was not official letterhead. It was not stamped or signed. It was a photocopy, faint and uneven. Lauren leaned forward despite herself. "That's a casualty movement log," she said quietly. "Yes," Grant replied, "from a mission that officially ended 12 years ago." Lauren scanned the page, her eyes moving faster now. "This section's redacted." "Not completely," Grant said. He tapped a line near the bottom. "Timestamp, grid reference, medical triage code." Lauren's brows drew together. "This code indicates on-site recovery," she said. "But the official after-action report lists no recovery." Grant nodded. "Because the recovery wasn't authorized." Margaret's hands tightened briefly, then relaxed again. Lauren looked up. "How did you get this?" Grant met her gaze evenly. "Because I was the one recovered." The room went very still. Lauren did not gasp or step back. She simply absorbed the statement, eyes searching Grant's face for exaggeration or performance, and finding neither. "You're saying the mission failed," she said slowly, "but you were extracted anyway." "I'm saying the mission was abandoned," Grant replied. "And someone went back." Lauren looked down at the paper again. "There's no handler listed," she said. Grant's mouth tightened. "There wouldn't be." Margaret spoke for the first time since entering the room. "My husband's name was Elias Klein," she said calmly. He was the handler. Lauren lifted her head, her expression sharpening. That name doesn't exist in the active handler registry, she said. Grant nodded. It was removed. Lauren looked between them. On whose authority? On everyone's, Grant said. That's how it works when something succeeds after it's been declared impossible. Lauren exhaled slowly. You understand what you're asking me to do. Grant shook his head. I'm not asking you to do anything. He reached for the paper again and slid it back toward her. I'm giving you data points that don't reconcile, a timestamp that overlaps a declared withdrawal, a medical code that contradicts a final status, and a canine asset with a legacy marker that aligns with both. Lauren's fingers hovered over the page. You're asking the system to admit a deviation. I'm asking the system to acknowledge reality, Grant said. It doesn't have to praise it. It doesn't have to reward it. It just has to stop pretending it didn't happen. Lauren leaned back slightly, considering. Her voice, when it came, was quieter. If I push this upstream, it won't be a conversation. It'll be a review. Grant nodded. That's fine. A review could end badly for the dog, Lauren continued. Or for you. Grant did not hesitate. I'm not in the file, he said. I don't exist as part of this problem. Rook does. Rook lifted his head slightly at the sound of his name, eyes briefly meeting Grant's before returning to the door. Lauren watched the interaction carefully. You're sure about that? Grant met her gaze. I've been sure for 12 years. Lauren looked at Margaret then. Mrs. Klein, once this starts, there's no guarantee of outcome. Margaret nodded. I understand. Lauren returned her attention to Grant. If I do this, I'll need corroboration, something the system can't dismiss as memory. Grant reached into his jacket again, this time removing nothing. I don't have paperwork, he said. I have consistency. He began listing facts, his voice even, unhurried. Grid coordinates spoken without hesitation. Time windows aligned to satellite passes. Environmental conditions that matched weather logs no one outside the operation would have reason to memorize. Medical details of his own injuries that matched the scar beneath his collarbone. Details that did not sound dramatic because they were not meant to be. Lauren stopped taking notes and simply listened. When Grant finished, the room felt different. Not tense, focused. That's enough, Lauren said finally. Not for closure, but for recognition. She stood, moving toward the wall-mounted screen. If I submit this, the language will matter. I won't say rescue, I won't say heroics, I'll say anomaly resolved. Grant nodded. That's all it ever was. Lauren glanced at Rook. And the dog? Grant's eyes followed hers. The dog is the anomaly that refuses to disappear. Lauren considered that, then nodded once. I'll escalate it, she said. Quietly. Margaret released a breath she had been holding. Lauren picked up her tablet. Once this goes through, they'll have a choice, she said. Acknowledge the deviation and close the file, or open it fully and answer questions they've avoided for years. Grant met her eyes. They'll close it. Lauren gave a faint wry smile. They usually do. Rook settled back down, body easing against the floor. Outside, the winter light dimmed further as snow began to fall, soft and persistent. Grant stepped back from the table. He had not argued. He had not demanded. He had simply spoken in the only language the system respected. Facts. The confirmation did not arrive with ceremony. There was no phone call that made people stop moving, no official envelope slid across a desk with gravity and seals. It came the way most corrections did inside large systems, quietly, incrementally, carried forward by language that sounded smaller than the truth it contained. 3 days after Grant Holloway spoke in facts, Dr. Lauren Whitaker stood alone in her office, reading the same paragraph for the third time. The office was narrow and utilitarian, a converted storage space at the edge of the clinic, its walls lined with filing cabinets and a single window overlooking the frozen parking lot. Snow drifted sideways outside, piling against the curb in uneven ridges. Lauren leaned back in her chair, tablet resting on her knee, auburn hair slipping loose from its tie as she exhaled slowly. The language was careful, sanitized. But it was there. Handler record partially restored. Canine asset status amended. Legacy review resolved. Lauren closed her eyes for a moment. Systems rarely apologized. This was as close as they came. She stood, smoothing the front of her sweater, and walked down the hall toward the waiting area. Margaret Klein was seated in the same chair she always chose, close to the window, hands folded over her purse. Time had not altered her posture. She sat as if she expected to remain for as long as necessary. Rook lay at her feet, his body arranged deliberately, head up, ears angled forward. Age had slowed him, but it had not softened his attention. His coat looked duller in the winter light, gray, heavy at the muzzle, but his eyes remained steady and alert. Grant stood nearby, leaning lightly against the wall, arms relaxed, presence contained. He had not asked for updates. He had learned long ago that waiting was often more effective than pressure. Lauren stopped in front of them. She did not smile. She did not soften the moment with preamble. She simply spoke. "They closed the review," she said. Margaret's fingers tightened once on her purse. Grant straightened slightly. Rook's ears flicked, then settled. Lauren continued. "The handler record for Elias Klein has been reinstated at a functional level. Not public, not ceremonial, but sufficient." She paused. "His role is now acknowledged as operationally valid." Margaret inhaled slowly. She did not cry. She did not ask questions. She nodded once, the gesture small but precise, as if confirming something she had always known and never needed proven. "And Rook?" Grant asked. Lauren met his eyes. "Rook is now classified as a retired military working dog with legacy honors. That means no reassignment, no transfer, no further review." She glanced down at the dog briefly. "He stays where he is." Margaret let out a breath she had been holding for years. Grant did not move. "Ownership?" he asked. Lauren shook her head. "No change. Margaret Klein remains his legal guardian." She hesitated, then added, "You're listed as emergency contact and logistical support." Grant nodded. That was exactly what he had intended. Recognition, not possession. Lauren crouched then, lowering herself carefully to Rook's level. She extended her hand, palm open, stopping short of contact. Rook watched her calmly, assessing. After a moment, he leaned forward just enough to acknowledge her presence, his nose brushing the air near her fingers. Lauren smiled faintly, more to herself than to anyone else. "You earned your rest," she murmured. Rook did not respond. He did not need to. Margaret rose slowly, joints stiff but controlled. She was shorter than Lauren by several inches, her frame slender, her movements deliberate. Up close, Lauren could see the years etched into her face, not as fragility, but as resolve. Margaret had lived alongside absence long enough to recognize when something finally settled. "I appreciate what you did," Margaret said. Lauren shook her head gently. "I corrected a file," she replied. "You carried the weight." Grant watched the exchange quietly. He felt no surge of victory, no sense of triumph. What he felt instead was a loosening, a subtle release of tension he had not realized he was still holding. Elias Klein's name now existed in the place it had always belonged. Rook's status was no longer a liability. The system had acknowledged reality without demanding ownership of it. They moved outside together a few minutes later. The parking lot was blanketed in fresh snow, the sky low and heavy. Margaret opened the door of her truck, an old model with faded paint and a bed lined with rubber mats worn smooth by years of use. Rook rose carefully, joints protesting, then stepped up into the cab without hesitation. He turned once, settled, and faced forward. Grant stood nearby, hands in his jacket pockets, watching. Margaret closed the door and turned to him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Grant met her gaze. "Yes," he replied. "I did." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Elias would have liked you," she said. Grant did not answer. He suspected Elias would have tolerated him. That felt like the highest compliment. Lauren remained by the entrance, arms folded loosely, watching them prepare to leave. She had returned the tablet to her pocket. The system would move on now, chasing other inconsistencies, other open ends. It always did. But this one had been resolved, not by force or appeal, but by accuracy. Margaret climbed into the driver's seat. The engine turned over with a familiar rattle. She paused before pulling away, lowering the window slightly. "He still watches the doors," she said, nodding toward Rook. Grant smiled faintly. "Some habits are worth keeping." The truck eased out of the lot, tires crunching over snow, tail lights fading into the gray afternoon. Grant remained standing for a moment longer, then turned back toward the clinic. The building looked the same as it always had, modest, unassuming. Inside, nothing marked what had just been corrected. No plaque, no announcement. That was fine. Recognition did not require display. Lauren stepped closer. "You okay?" she asked. Grant nodded. "Better than I expected." She studied him, then said, "Your name isn't anywhere in the report." Grant smiled slightly. "Good." Lauren returned the smile, brief and understanding. She had learned, like him, that some truths held their value precisely because they were not claimed. Rook would go home. Margaret would continue her quiet routines. Elias Klein's name would exist where it mattered. Grant Holloway would remain what he had always been in this story, present but not central. Ownership would have cheapened it. Recognition had been enough. Spring reached Lake Superior in short, decisive bursts. Ice cracked along the harbor, broke apart, and drifted away without waiting for permission. Snow thinned into wet patches along sidewalks and disappeared from shaded corners. Marquette adjusted quickly. Windows opened. Boots were set aside. The lake breathed again. Margaret Klein's house did not change. It sat where it always had, modest and quiet, a few blocks inland. What changed was the rhythm inside it. Mornings slowed, afternoons stretched. Rook no longer rose at first light. When he did stand, it took a moment. His movements were careful now, joints stiff but cooperative. His coat had faded, gray heavy at the muzzle and spreading across his back. His eyes remained clear. He still chose doorways, still listened when vehicles passed too close, but the tension had eased. The work was finished. Margaret adjusted without comment. She moved rugs where the floor was slick. She raised his bowls. She shortened their walks. She did not speak to him differently. She did not apologize for time. She treated him as she had treated Elias in his final years, with steadiness, with respect. Grant Holloway lived nearby. He rented a small place near the edge of town, close enough to walk to the water, far enough to be unnoticed. He had intended to stay briefly. He stayed. On most mornings he walked to Margaret's house just after sunrise. He did not knock loudly. He waited. When the door opened, he stepped aside so Rook could come out first. They walked the same route each time, past the low wall near the lake, along the narrow path where winter grass pushed through thawing soil. Grant kept his pace matched to Rook's without thinking. Slower now, measured, no destination beyond the walk. They did not talk. Grant and Margaret had settled into a quiet understanding. Some days she joined them. Some days she stayed on the porch and watched until they turned the corner. Grant never asked which it would be. Rook stayed close without a leash. He did not test boundaries. He walked as if still moving within an invisible perimeter only he understood. One afternoon, a boy stopped them. 8, maybe 9. Thin, curious. He asked to pet the dog. Grant looked to Rook. Rook stepped forward on his own. The boy touched his fur carefully, surprised by its coarseness. Rook accepted the contact, then stepped back. The moment ended. Grant nodded. They moved on. That was enough. Rook slept more as spring deepened. He favored the window in the afternoons, sunlight spilling across the floor. He stretched out now, body unguarded. When he watched the door, it was without urgency. Grant noticed. He said nothing. One evening, Grant stopped by with bread from the bakery near the harbor. Margaret nodded her thanks. They sat at the table, while Rook rested nearby, breathing slow and even. The house settled into night around them. "What will you do next?" Margaret asked. Grant considered. "Nothing urgent." She nodded. "That's good." They let the silence return. As the days warmed, Rook's world narrowed again. Shorter walks, longer rest, no resistance, just acceptance. One morning, Grant arrived to find Margaret seated on the porch, Rook lying beside her in the sun. "He didn't want to get up," she said. Grant crouched, resting a hand lightly on Rook's shoulder. Warm fur, slow breath. Rook opened one eye, then closed it again. "That's all right," Grant said. They stayed there. The lake breeze carried damp earth and thawed water. No one spoke. The debt had once felt enormous, heavy enough to shape years of silence and distance. Grant had believed it required repayment, action, recognition. He understood now that some debts were not settled by force or ownership. Some were resolved by presence, by staying without claiming, by letting what remained remain. Rook slept. Margaret watched. Grant stayed. The debt did not vanish. It no longer demanded. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. They arrive quietly, through loyalty that refuses to forget and truth that waits patiently to be seen. In this story, nothing supernatural breaks the laws of the world. And yet something holy happens. A life is spared, a debt is honored, a soul finds rest. That is often how God works, not by spectacle, but by presence. God does not always erase the scars we carry. Sometimes He allows them to remain so that one day they can become signs. Signs that remind us we were never abandoned. Signs that connect lives that were meant to cross again. What the system tried to bury, God allowed to endure, not for recognition, but for peace. In our daily lives, many of us carry unseen marks, memories, losses, acts of love no one ever thanked us for. The world may never record them, but God sees every step taken in silence, every moment of loyalty, every time we chose to stay when it would have been easier to leave. This story reminds us that faith is not always loud. Sometimes faith looks like staying, like protecting, like letting go of ownership and choosing presence instead. When we do that, we allow God to finish what we could not. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their quiet faith still matters. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss stories that speak to the soul. And if you believe that God still works through quiet miracles, through loyalty, through love that does not ask for credit, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you. May He protect those you love, and may He give peace to every debt you are still carrying.